This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey alongside Brian Tripp. Tripp, what a week 4 was, man. Holy hell. A lot of the games we previewed on Thursday not only lived up to the billing, they were tremendous games, had some upsets, unexpected results, a lot of the games going down to the wire. Overall, it was a great weekend, a fun weekend, I would say, for the conference. Your biggest takeaway, your biggest takeaway from the weekend's action was what?
I think that there's so much parity in the Big Ten in 2024. Sure, there are a lot of upper echelon teams, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, who, by the way, are 3 of the 6 remaining unbeaten teams in the Big Ten. But the middle of the pack in the conference, and then to see a matchup like USC at Michigan, that on CBS at 3:30, when those Pac-12 teams were added to the Big Ten, that is what you were hoping for. And a game like that to play out in front of a national audience, that was an incredible football game. And it was that USC passing attack against the old run-style Michigan. And Michigan is 6-0 in games in which they throw for less than 100 yards dating back to 2016. But I mentioned there are 6 unbeaten in the Big Ten, right? Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Rutgers, Indiana, and Illinois. That's my takeaway. The parity in the league. Rutgers, Indiana, and Illinois are among the 6 remaining unbeaten teams in the Big Ten through 4 weeks of the regular season.
Just like we thought, right? And just like we predicted in the preseason.
Hey, we were high on Rutgers. We were high on Indiana. I'm not sure either of us were high on Illinois, but for them to all get to this point undefeated is relatively unexpected. And Illinois-Nebraska on Friday night, a 31-24 win for the Illini on the road in overtime. You talk about living up to the hype, and 2 teams that I think are on track to have a really, really good year. We see Dylan Raiola for the first time face adversity, and I thought he was outstanding until the end of the game when his youth started to show for the first time. And credit Brett Bielema. What a coach, dialing it up and finding a way to get it done. You know, there's a couple of different reasons why I think Illinois won this game, but what an outstanding way to start the weekend. And that Friday night Big Ten time slot on Fox all of a sudden has become must-watch college football.
It has. I mean, the crowd was rocking 400th straight sellout there for Nebraska. It was an awesome crowd. Like you said, really just you get a really good audience now in that single window on Friday night. And the game lived up to the billing and more. You mentioned it, and I think you're right. At least for me, the biggest takeaway from that game, as Illinois does win, was the fact that we saw this freshman experience, not just from Raiola, but from a lot of the team, really show up. You had a great stat on Thursday. 54% of Nebraska's contributors were freshmen. Very inexperienced team, a young team that while they got off to a good start in 3-0, they haven't really been tested this season because they've gotten off to good starts in the first half and have put in cruise control in the second half. One of the keys we talked about was if you're Illinois to win this game, you keep it close in the first half, you can push Nebraska in a place they've never really been pushed before so far this season, and you go late into the fourth quarter and overtime. I think you saw Nebraska's inexperience really rear its ugly head from Raiola missing that third down pass that you had an open tight end in the end zone that could have really helped win the game right there. A missed field goal. I know your field goal kicker is hurt, so you're not going to put it on a backup kicker, but you're in a situation where you're relying on an inexperienced kicker to make a tough kick from the hash, did not go through, and then in overtime, between Illinois dialing it up, and I thought Raiola maybe trying to play a little bit too much hero ball, 3 sacks. I don't know about you, Tripp. I've never seen a 3rd and 42 in overtime in my life. We got to see that as well. It was a great Illinois win. I think, though, helped out by you saw the lack of experience from Nebraska here in this situation really come up to bite them.
And I think Nebraska was too one-dimensional in the football game on the offensive side. I thought both defenses were good. I think the 2 reasons Illinois won, at least offensively, is that Luke Altmaier played a near-perfect game, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, only had 6 incompletions, and he looked like the veteran quarterback that everyone was hoping to see last year for Illinois. If Luke Altmaier, everyone thought last year he had the potential to be the guy we've seen so far here, with Illinois having 2 wins against ranked opponents for the first time in a single season since 2007, in the first 4 games ever in their program history. If Luke Altmaier continues to play this way, they can beat anyone. And I know they're 17.5-point dogs going on the road. They got a big one in Happy Valley this week. But he's got Zachary Franklin, who was hurt with a leg injury in the game.
Yeah.
Big question mark what his status is going forward. And Pat Bryant, 2 big-time wide receivers, 5 receptions, 74 yards, a couple of touchdowns. He hasn't thrown a pick all year to 10 touchdown passes. I think he outplayed Dylan Raiola. And Illinois, while it wasn't a great rushing attack against a really, really good Nebraska front 7 on the road, they had 166 yards to Nebraska's 48. Now, Nebraska's net of 48 is impacted because of the way they lost yards in the passing game at the end. But still, those 2 things to me were the entire difference offensively in the football game. I like what Illinois did. I think Brett Bielema had a good game plan, and his ability to mix different personnel. Altmaier, obviously a start, but you still see them going to some of those heavy fronts. One of his touchdown passes to an offensive lineman late in that game. Illinois just outplayed Nebraska in the big moments, and that is why they won, and really, really impressive to do it on the road to get to 4-0 for the first time in over a decade since 2011.
You're right. And they deserve a lot of credit for, like you said, in that moment, they were ready. And I think part of that goes to the coaching of Brett Bielema, who maybe it's easy to forget because of his time at Arkansas and even a slower start at Illinois. He's still a really good coach. I would say college football is better off as a whole when his teams are winning. He's a great personality. He's a good coach. He's a fun guy to be around. And you were seeing that right now. I thought in those big moments, like you said, they were just better. Illinois was a better coach team.
I'll tell you, I interviewed Brett after the infamous 9 overtime Illinois win at Penn State a couple of years ago. And obviously, like any winning coach in the moment, especially that type of historic game that went 9 overtimes, is going to give you a great interview. But his genuine enjoyment of the game and happiness for victory, the way he treated others, and just his ability to resonate with a fan base. You look at him, you're like, hey, I don't know how long is this guy going to be out there, coach? And he's not exactly he's not a physical specimen by any means. I mean, maybe for some people, but like he gets it done. And he's kind of that Midwest good guy, great personality. I loved it. And I think you can see just being around him in a short instance, the way he treated me, the way he treats his players, the way that his players love him. You can see why he's a really good college football coach, and he's got the X's and O's to go with it too, schematically. I think he's really underrated, and I think he's really good. And I think last year was an anomaly for them, and he has them going in the right direction, as evidenced by the start this season.
And now you look forward. You mentioned the Penn State game coming up this weekend, primetime game for Illinois, back on the road now against a top 10 opponent, 17.5-point underdogs. They still play Michigan. They still play Oregon. I think what you can say for Illinois going forward here is even if they lose 2 out of the 3, all 3, what won't happen in the 3 biggest games left on their schedule is that they are not going to beat themselves. In this game, they are well coached. They will force you to out-talent them, out-execute them, out-scheme them. They will not give you free turnovers. They will not make coaching blunders. They will not have many blown coverages. They will not beat themselves here. And that's, again, when you have a tough, veteran, well-coached team, that does lead you to being in some of these late games. And if you are able, we've seen Oregon struggle early on here in putting teams away. You hang around late. We saw, like you said, with that Penn State not overtime game a few years ago, they hung around and eventually got to the point where they were able to swing and connect on the knockout punch and win that game against what was a top 10 Penn State team. And most people, including yours truly here, thought it'd be an easy W. So that is a team to not overlook going forward. If you're a Penn State fan, an Oregon fan, a Michigan fan here going forward, that's just at least the 3 best teams left on their schedule. Not to mention everyone else they're playing, because this is a team that does not beat themselves. They're very well coached, veteran experience here really coming up key in what was a hostile road environment on a short week nonetheless, and going to Lincoln and winning against Nebraska. A few numbers I want to throw by your Chip on this game because I've never seen these numbers before. I'm not sure we ever will. So you mentioned it before going to this game. This was now Nebraska's 25th consecutive loss against an AP 25 team, second longest streak in all the country, or all the Power Four, I should say, only behind Rutgers, who has lost 40 straight games here against AP ranked teams. But here's
I think that will change too.
Ooh, okay. All right. All right, Rutgers fans, stick around. We got you covered here in a little bit. But this stat trip, my brain is still broken. I saw it Friday night. It's been like 72 hours since, and I still can't wrap my brain around it. This was now the 8th consecutive overtime game for Nebraska in which not only they've lost, but they haven't scored a point in. As a reminder, you get the ball at the 25-yard line. It's not the NFL. There's no kickoff, and you are guaranteed the ball no matter what happens. And for 8 straight overtime games, you have failed to score a point when starting from the 25-yard line. And to break it down even further, not only do they have 0 points in 8 overtimes consecutively, 0 first downs, 4 interceptions, and in 28 total plays, they have totaled negative 20 yards. What is it with overtime? How is that possible? How is that possible?
I would be curious how many times they had the ball first versus how many times they possessed the ball second. Because if you have the ball second and the other team scores a touchdown, that impacts your decision-making, how you handle the set of downs as opposed to having it first. But you'd think at some point, right, any team that has a long losing streak, like the Flyers had it in the NHL in shootouts for the longest time. At some point, you're just going to luck into a win or a goal or something. How hasn't that happened for Nebraska? Coming out of this game, you mentioned the losing streak against AP top 25 teams continuing for them. Where does Nebraska now go from here? And for me, everyone was putting them on a pedestal thinking they have arrived. And I don't know that they haven't arrived. But I think there was a rush to expedite the process, right? There's a process to becoming a winning, mature football team. They're so young. They still very likely could have a 7, 8, 9 win season for a program that hasn't been to a bowl, hasn't had a winning season in over 8 years. For me, that's still a really good season for them. The expectation and the hope was, we're just going to go from worst to first. That's unrealistic with what they had. Dylan Raiola still played a really, really good game, even though he looked like a true freshman at times. Maybe a call or two goes your way that didn't go your way in that game. Maybe you felt like you got a call or two in that game too, right? The officiating was odd, to say the least, on Friday night. And it might have been a full moon too. Trying to think back. It was sometime last week.
I think it was. It was a little wacky. Harvest moon, I think.
Yeah. But to say they arrived, I think they're back, and I think they're trending in the right direction, but you can't rush that process to get to where you want to be, and there's going to be typically a hiccup or two along the way. This is just a step for them in their ascension back towards the top of the league and being one of the upper echelon teams in the Big Ten. I think it's a minor setback. I don't think it's a complete disaster, even though with their schedule, they were hoping to start, 7-0 before that big game coming up end of October.
And I think that's why I'm putting myself here in this as well, why there was a lot of people believing in Nebraska. I wouldn't say it was so much the talent and everything else, but it was, like you said, you look at the schedule here and it's, wow, win. We both, and I think a lot of people underestimated how good Illinois could be this year. And that was one of the games we thought, okay, write it off, win for Nebraska. And now you're like, well, if they just win the games they're supposed to, you're 7-0. But I think that's the wrong assumption that now I think we're paying the price for. And you're right. It's not just going from bad to great. There are steps and there are setbacks along that path. And one of those lessons you have to learn is winning games you're supposed to win. Mm-hmm. You were 8.5-point favorites at home in a short week. That was a game you were supposed to win if you're Nebraska. And I think part of the ascension is taking care of business first. Forget about beating Ohio State and beating Oregon, the top teams here. In order to get to that level where you're ready to compete against them, one of the steps you have to take, and they have yet to do this, is to consistently beat teams you're supposed to beat. It's a learning lesson. I'm with you. You're not ready to write off Nebraska. They still could be 6-1, 5-2 going into the game, which is still solid, but it's a lesson they have to learn.
Yeah, and I don't love the label. And I know, right, Vegas is always right. Illinois is a 17.5-point dog to start going to Happy Valley. You got a 19th ranked team in the country against it. I don't know that it was a game that they were supposed to win. I think it was a game they were favored to win because they were at home. Supposed to win's a little strong for me, but a game, if you want to be an elite program or where you expect to be at the end, at home, you have to win. You have to find a way to win that game. They just aren't at that point yet that they don't have the experience of, okay, we're in a nail biter. We're in a close game. We're not front running for once. What do we do? What do we do? How can we close a game out, right? Those are things they have to learn because they had an opportunity to close that out at the end and they didn't. That is something they have to learn. I don't love the phrase supposed to win, but a game that many people expect you to win is the way I would phrase it, even though Vegas allegedly always knows best and is always right.
The last thing I'll say here is that I know if you're a Nebraska fan, this is still probably tough and you're still frustrated. Mm-hmm. But the good news with this loss is, with everyone being so young, your timeline is still where it's supposed to be.
Yes.
This is not like this is it, and next year, well, everyone graduates. I don't know. This team is going to be together for the most part, the core, for 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. This could be a loss you look back on maybe next year or 2 years from now and say, this was the loss that kind of, like you said, helped them learn how to win and get them closer to getting over the hump. It's far from over here. This is just the beginning for Nebraska. And this could be one of those games, one of those defeats you look back on and say, that was actually a blessing in disguise. I don't know if we'll talk about that trip here when it comes to USC losing against Michigan in the Big House, letting up a touchdown with just about 30 seconds to go here. Safe to say, we'll give you our Big Ten rankings here at the end of the show. I will not have USC, shocker here, as the number one team in the Big Ten, in part because their run defense was torn apart, was ripped apart by Michigan in this game. I want to ask you, they look good. USC's run defense looked good against LSU. There's reason to believe, even with Alex Orji a quarterback, they would do a good job of containing Michigan's rush offense. Were you more disappointed in this game with USC's rush defense or more impressed with Michigan's running offense?
I was more impressed with Michigan's running offense. I still think USC is a better defensive team than they were at this point last season. And to expect them to make a complete 180 is probably an assumption. And maybe we overestimated what they did in the first couple of weeks against the opponents they played to start the season. But Michigan, like we said, going into the Texas game, and Michigan was throttled by a true national championship contender in Texas. Michigan proved they are still the defending national champions, and they are still Michigan. They had a statement to make in this game. Everyone, including the two of us on this podcast, was writing off Michigan. There's no way they can get it done with a formula that has proven to be incredibly successful over the last 3-4 seasons for their program. Whether it's Jim Harbaugh or Sharon Moore as the head coach, they looked like Michigan in that game on Saturday. Now, that was the first half. The second half, I'm not sure how they escaped with the win, but I think they came out and made a statement that they still can be a physical smash mouth football team and have success. The 290 rushing yards, 6.5 yards per carry, Mullings 159 yards and 2 touchdowns. Donovan Edwards had the 41-yard touchdown run. They looked more like Michigan. USC still could have stole that game and should have won that game in the second half, but I'm more impressed with what Michigan did, making a statement, and the resiliency and the personality and the character they showed to find a way to get it done, relying really on a one-dimensional offense and a strong defense.
One-dimensional offense. That's why, for me, I'm more disappointed with USC's defense. You knew what was coming and couldn't stop it. And for me, it's different than last year when Michigan ran the ball 32 straight times against Penn State, because that was a national championship caliber team last year where they had 5 senior-laden and elite offensive linemen. You had a really good running back duo, like great coaching. They were built to do that. They were built to just bludgeon you to death. And even if you told them or they told you what's coming, it was still hard to stop. This year is not the case. They had to replace everybody on the offensive line. They're still trying to figure out quarterback and get a consistent run game going. By the way, Khalil Mullings, any doubt now running back with number 1? Jeez. Holy cow. Let's put that to bed. Give him some more carries. Sheesh. But you knew what was coming. No Colston Loveland, your best and only really receiving threat. You have a quarterback in Alex Orji who, out of 57 plays on offense that were called for Michigan, 45 were runs. They didn't want him to pass. They didn't ask him to pass. So if you're Danson Lynn and USC, you knew what was coming and still couldn't stop it. And even with a second half turnaround, just tackle. It was poor fundamentals. You let Mullins just go on a beast run that really changes the game late after you seemingly had the win locked down.
Mm-hmm.
You knew what was coming, couldn't stop it. With less talent on Michigan's offense this year compared to last year, I came away more disappointed with USC's defense.
Take all that out of the picture. How did Michigan win? Here are their second half drives. 3 plays, -1 yard. 3 plays, 7 yards. 3 plays, 1 yard. 1 play, 6 yards. 3 plays, -4 yards. And then the 10-play, 89-yard drive that saw only 1 pass completion and the go-ahead touchdown resulting with 37 seconds left. And I know they had the Will Johnson pick six was huge for them in that second. It was the only spark they had. They needed it because USC had all the momentum. But how does a team win with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight drives in which they accumulate basically no yardage? They can't stay on the field to save their lives. How did they win? How did they win that game?
How they did partly was their defense. Give them credit.
Yeah.
Their defense kept them in. I mean, the first half, they just suffocated USC's offense, suffocated them, and made Miller Moss's life hell, just push around that offensive line. So you kept the game within reach. And that's the point where you got to the point where your offense could just forget going in neutral, go reverse, go backwards here for what felt like almost the entirety of the second half and still come out with a win. How about I give Sherrone Moore a lot of credit here. Not that it was, you had to get too creative, but I think sometimes with a game on the line, coaches overthink it, try to get too cute, gets down to the goal line, 4th and goal from, what was it, about the 1-2 yard line? Yep. We're not getting cute here. We are running the ball with our identity, smash mouth football, ran it with Mullins, ran it, pushed everyone off the line, got in the end zone here. I give more credit for that play call of not trying to get too cute and just saying, you know what, this is what we've been doing well. Let's just keep riding it.
Question for you. For which team moving forward, what does it mean for Michigan moving forward, USC moving forward? Is there greater concern? Is there greater optimism? Whose path does it impact, this result impact the most, right? Because everyone was super high on USC. Oh, USC's there in that same category as Penn State, Oregon. The team's trying to chase Ohio State as a potential Big Ten championship college football playoff contender. Who does it mean? Is it, hey, USC's not quite there yet? Or is this, hey, let's still include Michigan in that category? This result means more for which of the two teams?
I would say it means more for USC in terms of knocking them down from Big Ten title contention and college football playoff berth. Because you look at Michigan, really good win and a surprising win. I didn't think they were going to get it, but you still have Oregon on your schedule, still have Ohio State on your schedule. 2 very, very tough challenges with already 1 L on your resume. I don't think a 9-3 team this year is making the college football playoff. So even though it's a really good win for Michigan, I don't see them right now beating either Oregon or Ohio State. I don't see their chances of making the college football playoff going up that drastically. Where USC was, we're about to put them as a top 10 team if they won this game on the road. You have Penn State coming to town in a few weeks. Their schedule is not as challenging, not as daunting. And I know they still have opportunities. You can still beat Penn State, still beat Notre Dame at the end of the year, and still make one of the 12, be one of the 12 teams to make the playoff. But I think when you look at how they lost this game defensively, how their offensive line got pushed around, how at times it felt like maybe the moment was a little too big for Lincoln Riley at times, especially in the first half. I just think I felt more disappointed. Okay, let's recalibrate how I think about USC versus all of a sudden, oh, Michigan's back and this team, like, how do we write them off? They're right back squarely in the mix here when it comes to the Big Ten race.
I think USC, and I agree with you, USC, it's almost that same philosophy where we were at with Nebraska, right? Here's a team that struggled down the stretch last year, had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. 9 wins is probably a pretty good year for USC, knowing what they had changing on defense. Miller Moss, weren't quite sure he looks like the real deal at quarterback. 9 wins is still a really good year for USC. I think it's because of how they started, because of the win against LSU in Vegas. Our expectations may be a little higher than they should have been for USC. USC is still probably a top 15, top 20 team. That's a good year for them based on how they finished last season. I think it just forces us to re-examine what our expectations are and reevaluate them for the Trojans moving forward.
I like that comp because not all is lost. The season is far from over, but like you said, it does kind of maybe bring you back down to reality a little bit here, what to expect.
And the new era of college football, if you're a top 15, top 20 team, that means you're still playing for something in November. Unlike last year, top 15, top 20 means your season might be over mid-October. And that's what I love about the 12-team college football playoff. Like, yeah, you're going to need to go on a run at some point. You're going to need to win a big game, but you're not out of it because you still control your own destiny by playing those good opponents down the stretch.
You're absolutely right about that. So, yeah, a tough L there for USC. Michigan back in the win column, getting some momentum here going forward. How about getting some momentum here, at least for 1 week? How about Iowa? How about Iowa going to Minnesota, taking down the Golden Gophers? And really, I should say, Kaleb Johnson going to Minnesota, taking down the Golden Gophers. What a game Iowa's running back had, Trip.
Iowa trailed 14-7 at halftime in this game. They outscored Minnesota 24-0 in the second half. It's the fourth straight game for Iowa with 200 or more rushing yards, their longest streak since 2013. You mentioned Johnson, 206 and 3 touchdowns, 272 rushing yards total after they had 11 rushing yards last year in their loss to Minnesota. This is just, digging deep. You're behind. Not sure what you have this year. Everyone thought you were going to be really good. Played really good defense the entire game, but a second half for Kaleb Johnson to remember. And Iowa, after having lost to Iowa State, really saving its season with that second half on the road in what can be a tough place to play when they have a good crowd like they did in Minneapolis.
No, you're right about that. And how about this? We talked about on Thursday how this could be like a ground and pound weekend for the Big Ten, kind of old school Big Ten football. Michigan won by throwing for just 32 yards in the game.
Yep.
Iowa won for throwing for 62 yards in the game.
That's 94 combined yards. 94 combined yards.
And 2 wins. Oh, the Big Ten is so
Big
bad.
Ten.
It is so
Big Ten football.
Back. But Kaleb Johnson, best running back in the country, leading all rushers. Some of those runs he had just were unbelievable where I thought Minnesota had him for the backfield. All of a sudden, one move, he slips out of a hole and he's gone. His breakaway.
Guess we should have known, right?
Field. Should have seen that coming. Holy cow. But what a performance for him. But you look at this game, Trip, going forward here. Another tough loss for Minnesota. They're 2-2 on the season. PJ Fleck afterwards came out and said this loss is on him. They played a great first half, as you mentioned, up 14-7, and just were bullied, outplayed in the second half in every aspect. He said that was on him for not having his guys ready to play for 60 minutes. If you're Minnesota right now, is it time to start thinking about moving on from PJ Fleck and starting a new era in Minnesota?
I don't think they will because, remember, he was pursued by UCLA during the off season. And for those of you who aren't PJ Fleck fans in Minneapolis or across the country, some are probably thinking, okay, he's already reached his ceiling here. Let him take his boats and row him out west into the Pacific.
I like that.
And they amended his contract. They didn't extend his contract, but they amended his contract to keep him. So I don't think at this point they're hitting the panic button. We need a reset with PJ Fleck. When they did that this offseason, they committed to PJ Fleck for a couple of years. Not to mention his buyout, and this is a lot for a school like Minnesota, is $22.75 million to make a move at this point for the Gophers. PJ Fleck is not going anywhere for Minnesota right now. I think it's some deep examination of what happened here for a defense that had back-to-back shutouts, granted, against lesser opponents, and only allowed 7 points in the first half of this game. You had to be feeling pretty good at halftime if you're a Minnesota fan. What happened? And there have just been too many of those what happened moments for PJ Fleck on the field during his time in Minneapolis. He's added excitement to the program. He's recruited well. They have the facilities. There are obviously some challenges being Minnesota, where they're located, NIL, recruiting, like all that. They aren't a team with a budget of a Penn State and Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Oregon. I think there's a lot of good with PJ Fleck, but for whatever reasons, outside of 1 or 2 years, they really haven't had the win-loss record and the results to show it. But because of where they're at, they're kind of committed to him for the time being in Minneapolis.
Like you said, they went 11-2 back in 2019, the best year he's had at Minnesota, without a doubt, best year of his career. 9-4 back-to-back years, 2021, 2022. So it's not been all bad.
Yeah.
But you said the C word before, ceiling. Do you think that Minnesota under Fleck has reached their ceiling?
Yes, absolutely.
I agree with you. I'm with you 100%. And that's why, for me, I know the buyout is big. But if you're Minnesota, I would look at right now with what Indiana did and Tom Allen.
Yeah.
Where you could say, you know what? look, Tom had some good years. Okay, it's not going great, but we're a basketball school. We'll keep Tom Allen. He's competent, and we'll just kind of ride this out and hope he turns it around. They move on from Tom. Bring in Kirk Cignetti, has reinvigorated the entire program so far. They're 4-0. There's real buy-in with Indiana football for the first time in how long? I think if you're Minnesota and you feel like your best days are behind you, if we are both in agreement that they are, I think you got to look around and say, you know what? If it's not going to get better, if we don't think that we can reach, a double-digit win season again under Fleck and better days are ahead, I think you have to start asking yourself the question, is it worth right now kind of keeping him around, or should we bite the bullet and try to move on?
But if you have that hope that he can get you back to a 9-win season, that's a good year for Minnesota. If you have the hope he can get you to an 11-win season once every decade, once every 6, 7, 8 years, I think that's good for Minnesota. His contract runs through 2019. Or 2029. I think you don't extend him at this point. If there's other offers to him, you say, okay, go explore those. But until it truly gets stale, and I don't think it's stale for them yet there's no reason to consider moving on, because who are you going to get that's going to do any better? You might in a year or two need that reinvigoration of the program the way Indiana did, just to get that fan base motivated again and energized. I don't think they're at that point yet with PJ Fleck.
You still have your 2-2 right now. And speaking of which, kind of one of those what happened games, first game of the year against North Carolina. What the hell happened and how you lost that one? But you just lose to Iowa. You're at Michigan next week. All of a sudden now it looks like a big, bad, tough test. Yeah. USC comes to town. You still play at Illinois. That's going to be a really tough game. You play Penn State. You're at Wisconsin. This is, you were 6-7 last year. This is not getting any easier. Getting right now getting to a bowl game right now seems like an uphill climb if you're PJ Fleck. And I don't think the bottom will fall out per se, but if you're talking about, a 4-win season, again, I don't think it'll get that bad, but
what I would be curious. What did our preseason prognostication have for? Didn't we both have Minnesota at 4 wins at the beginning of the year?
We both were down on them. You were right about that. I have to bring that up, but you are not wrong in the sense that there was no optimism from you or I. Look at us. Once in a while, we got some things right, huh? How about that, Trip? Speaking of preseason, what we also were right about? Buying into Rutgers.
Their schedule, man.
That's a nice.
That's good. I don't want to take away from them. They're good. Their schedule's really helpful compared to Minnesota's, but 26-23 on the road at Virginia Tech, a place they've never won. And they had some adversity in this game, right? They were up 23-7. It looked like cruise control mode, and they had to find a way to get it done and win it 26-23 at the end. And we came in talking about Kyle Monangai and their run game, and obviously Brent Pry and Virginia Tech talked about Kyle Monangai and their run game all week too. And Rutgers found a way to get it done with good pass protection, with Ethan Kaliakmanis having a stable game. And I see you nodding your head. You're like, wow, you nailed that pronunciation.
Rushed it.
And they found a way on the road to get it done without having a huge game from Monangai. And that's a really good win for Rutgers.
That is because I wasn't sold that they could do that. We talked about, trying to ride one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, one of the best running backs in the country. But Kaliakmanis, even you mentioned their schedule. It's not like their schedule has been very impressive whatsoever so far through the first 2 games when you play Howard and Akron. You're not learning a lot, but there's not a lot of belief right now in the passing offense. Okay, yeah, if we can't get the run game established, we can win by throwing the ball. And that's exactly what happened. They won this game by throwing the ball. It was a really, really impressive performance there by Rutgers.
Kaliakmanis, when he was at Minnesota, he was a pretty prized recruit, and he played as a freshman, and everyone thought this guy's next for the Gophers, and he's going to lead them there. Had a hiccup, had injuries, and he's good. He might be the best quarterback Rutgers has had in a pretty long time, at least passing the football. And then their defense, that's really the story, right? Like, didn't have the run game. Kaliakmanis played well. Not great, but well. But their defense, Greg Schiano defense in that enemy territory, they set the tone. And that ultimately, I know they kind of coughed it up at the end, but that ultimately was a big reason for their win too. Forced
3 turnovers, also caused a safety, which, by the way, I think Dan Orlovsky's right. I think it's that safety that Kyron Drones had, where he got stepped on by his offensive lineman twice and flung the ball into the third row behind him. I think Dan Orlovsky now is we can move on from him in terms of running out of the back of the end zone. There have been plenty of other worse ones. Jimmy G did the same thing recently. He's been absolved, let's say, from that viral safety. What now? Almost, I hate to say it, almost 15 years ago, 20 years ago. That was
dating ourselves.
I know that was a long time. But like you said, the defense. Look, the fourth quarter. Okay, sure, the bottom came out a little bit, but they also, they got a game-winning interception right after the offense was able to move right down the field and kick what was a go-ahead field goal, despite the momentum being all on Virginia Tech's side. Credit to the offense and credit to Ian Strong taking a screen pass, 63 yards to put them in field goal range and really quiet that crowd. And the defense came out and didn't even give really Drones and this Hokie offense any sort of chance of belief of tying or winning the game. Get a pick, game over, go home, get the hell out of there. That was an impressive win for Rutgers. They're a tough team. They're tough. Oh, they are tough. Speaking of tough, how about Jonathan Smith and Michigan State? I know they lost the game, but with how they played, you know what I would compare them to take a basketball reference? They feel like the best league pass team in the Big Ten, where their record is not going to be pretty, but they play an exciting style of football where it is kind of helter-skelter. Aiden Childs in one play can dazzle you and make this unreal highlight play. The next week, you just throw an awful interception. And what the hell are you looking at? It's highs and lows, but it's going to lead to fun and exciting games, close games. And I think if you're Michigan State, I should say, in this one, even though you did lose, it was a tough opponent on the road in the weather conditions too. It was pouring rain for most of that one there in Chestnut Hill. You have to feel good about right now where Jonathan Smith is taking this program, just because right now they are tough and competitive, even though they're not right yet learning how to win these games.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're ahead of schedule for Jonathan Smith. I really like what they did. That's a tough environment. BC was a sellout crowd at night. Thomas Castellanos, they kept the lid on enough. You know, Boston College wants to run the football, especially on a night like is an emotional night with the red bandana game. And it took all of 60 minutes for Boston College to win that game. And BC's a good team, obviously well coached. They have belief there. That's a program that's been reinvigorated, talking about the energy that Bill O'Brien has brought there. That's another good game for Michigan State. We've talked so much about Childs and Nick Marsh already. Their defense to go in there, I know it's sloppy, but to be physical, allow only 290, that's a big step forward for a defense that has a lot of holes. That's a big step for them against Boston College. I know it didn't, as you said, it didn't end the way Michigan State wanted, but they're one of those teams that you thought would be a slouch and a complete pushover this year. I don't think that's going to be the case in any game. And they seem like they're heading in the right direction a lot faster than a lot of people thought they would.
Especially when you look at the state of the program when Smith took over. I mean, you had the whole Mel Tucker drama, and even before he got fired and that whole incident, and they were backsliding with him and just getting worse and worse. There's not a lot of belief in the program. There's not a lot of talented players on the roster. And so to come in and right away in a short off season, just again, make them competitive and tough and exciting. You have a quarterback of the future in Childs here, who again, as long as he's able to cut down turnovers, has shown you he can put up some yards here, he can make some plays and really put some points up on the board. What he took over and to where it is right now, a month into the season, I'm with you. You have to feel good about right now the future of Michigan State and where Jonathan Smith is leading this program.
And they're going to play in one of what I think are three really interesting Big Ten games this week. Games that we're going to learn. I think the result's going to be what the result is for all of these games. The favored team is going to win. But I think games that we'll learn a lot. Right? They host Ohio State. I don't think they're beating Ohio State. But if they can keep that spread under what it is of 25 points, that's a good game for them. Can they compete? Can they show that they have some semblance of a team against Ohio State? They're not going to have the playmakers that Ohio State has. Ohio State is going to score a lot of points, but can they keep that game competitive for a quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters? We're going to learn a lot about Michigan State in that game at home against Ohio State on Saturday night. That's a Peacock game. The other one, I think Indiana 4-0 against Maryland 3-1. Maryland's got some guys, and I know they lost to Michigan State, a game they should have won. We could be talking about 4-0 Maryland at 4-0 Indiana this week as a really interesting game at noon. Again, Indiana, 7-point favorite. I think they win the game. But we really learned a lot about how good is Indiana in that game against Maryland. And the third one, Rutgers, I'm surprised is only a 1-point favorite at home against Washington. Eli Rogers and Washington going all the way across the country to play a Friday game against Rutgers. Both teams coming off a short week. That, again, favorite team, Rutgers, granted by 1 point. I think they win the game, but we learn how good Rutgers is with Washington coming to town, unless something crazy happens. I think the three favorites win those games, but those are the teams I'm looking forward to learning more about going into the week, because there's only really one huge game on the schedule, and it's Saturday night, 19th ranked Illinois at 9th ranked Penn State. That's really the only huge game on the schedule in week 5. USC's hosting Wisconsin, Oregon's at UCLA. Again, Ohio State's at Michigan State, a game they're favored in by 25 points. Nebraska favored by 10 points on the road. Purdue is really struggling. Minnesota's at Michigan. You expect Michigan to take care of business there. But I think Rutgers, Washington's interesting. Indiana, Maryland's interesting. And Ohio State, Michigan State's interesting. And those are the teams I mentioned. Michigan State, big dog. Indiana, home favorite. Rutgers, 1 point home favorite. Those are the three teams I want to learn more about going into this week outside of the huge matchup at night in Happy Valley.
I love those, all three you mentioned, because you're right. It's different outcomes, but you could still have different expectations and have different takeaways.
Yes.
Despite, even if things go how you think, it is.
That's our theme this week: expectations versus reality. Where do you set the bar? I think each Big Ten program, right? There's reasonable expectations that you can set. Ohio State's expected to compete for a national championship every year. Jim Harbaugh has reset the bar for Michigan. Okay, we know we lost 13 guys to the NFL. We lost our head coach to the NFL. He took half our staff with him to the NFL. This year might be, we understand if it's not a national championship season for Michigan, but Michigan's supposed to compete for a national championship every year. Penn State is supposed to be in the college football playoff every year. Now it's a 12-team playoff. USC, you're expecting to be in the playoff and competing for a championship. Oregon, you're expecting to be in the playoff and competing for a championship. Washington might also be in that category. Granted, they're kind of in that Michigan spot. We lost our head coach to Alabama. We lost half of our team. Let's hit the reset button. Like, those programs, they are what they are. You know where they're supposed to be. But what is a realistic expectation long-term, but also on a season-by-season, game-by-game basis for some of those programs? And I think that's where you're at right now, measuring success of 2024, success of a game, not just long-term goals and expectations for a program, but short-term goals and expectations for a program. And when you talk about a PJ Fleck and do you pursue his buyout, do you move on from PJ Fleck? No, because what is Minnesota supposed to be? Curt Cignetti, if they finish the year 7-8 wins, that's great. You know, that compared to where they're supposed to be, that's a great season. Does having success change and raise and alter those expectations, the long-term ones moving forward? Sure, but you always have to remember who you are and what your program is. And there's a reason why Nebraska has been battling to get back to what they have been for the last 10 years. And Matt Rule, just because they lost one game this week, doesn't change the direction that Nebraska's heading. And that's kind of like the theme this week and going into next week, outside of what is just a huge game. Illinois at Penn State. Penn State 17.5-point favorites, coming off a week in which they set a school record dating back to 1926 for total yards in a game against Kent State, which allows 700 plus for the second consecutive week. At least they got paid to come and get throttled. Yeah. But Penn State and Drew Aller looked like the real deal against a bad Kent State team. And Bowling Green took Texas A&M down to the wire on the road. So, like, this is how good is Penn State? We get our first true test in that game in Illinois. What can Brett Bielema do on the road again this week in a really tough, what they're calling whiteout energy, whiteout environment in Happy Valley? Yeah,
right now the only night game, right, for Beaver Stadium scheduled so far for 2024. So it should be an electric atmosphere. And Illinois has proven to you already so far through 2 games, they can beat ranked opponents and they can go on the road and not be fazed by the noise, by the environment. Should be really fun here.
Really quick, you know, being on the sideline and being at the Penn State game Saturday, I know you watched it with close eyes as well. You can make a lot about it was Kent State. Don't put any stock into it. But some of the throws, I don't care who's on defense, some of the throws Drew Aller made into incredibly tight windows with his arm strength to put the ball 20, 30 yards downfield on a line. To see it at field level, to see it from different perspectives. Again, it's Kent State, and I know Penn State did not look great at times against Bowling Green. But the overall body of work for Drew Aller so far through 3 games in 2024, using his feet in the Andy Kotelnicki offense, if Penn State comes out on Saturday night and does beat Illinois by 17.5 points, look out. They look good. I mean, they looked, again, it is Kent State, the worst of 134 teams in the FBS right now. I get it. But some of the throws he made were unbelievable in that game from watching it at field level. And they only allowed 64 total yards against too, which again, it's Kent State. I get it. But it was a real impressive bounce back after a bye, after a tough game against Bowling Green, and you couldn't ask for any more out of them.
But I think when you look at Penn State, even Ohio State so far, because a similar schedule and who they're playing, I don't think you're crazy to draw some conclusions about what you're seeing. Sure, again, like you said, you measure it based on the opponent, but still, you are seeing things, and to make it Penn State specific here for a second, I will equate this win against Kent State to last year against UMass. UMass was horrific, and Penn State won that game. It was 63-0. And I know there's some elements, it was raining, but we saw that
2 punt return touchdowns.
Right. They still did not. You're right about that. They did not look like they did on Saturday against Kent State. There were still some concerns, and it was just one of those, I'm just better than you. So even though maybe it was a bad throw, I can still make a play just because my talent is so much greater than yours. But when you watch Penn State against Kent State on Saturday, you saw, like you said, a lot of real throws that sure were successful against Kent State, but can translate to Illinois on Saturday, can translate to USC in a few weeks, can translate to Ohio State. I think the same thing for the Buckeyes. When you see that run game going from against Marshall, it's sure, the opponent stinks, but it's also you see the talent and the execution shining to where you're making good cuts. The blocking is there. I don't think it's measured, and we're not going to get too crazy, but it's also not just to completely throw it away. That game means nothing. It's Kent State. I think you're right in a few things that you saw can truly be real going forward.
Yeah, Ohio State might not have played anyone so far, but that doesn't mean Jeremiah Smith's numbers are a fluke.
Right.
He is the real.
Is just invisible, right?
Yeah, they're the real deal. And I feel that way I do feel that way strongly. And it's an overreaction to say, Penn State's not deserving to be a top 10 team because of the Bowling Green game. Well, they had one bad half on defense and maybe one average half on offense. They just happened to be the first and second halves, conversely, in that game. Same thing about Oregon. Just because they had tight games early, they found a way to win. And all that matters is what type of team you have October, November, December, January. They're going to be there. They look really, really good. And they looked really, really good last time out. I feel that way about those 3 teams right now in the Big Ten. I think they are all playoff teams and national championship contenders. I do.
I'm with you. And I'm glad you pointed out Drew Aller. Like I said, it's Kent State. We're not going to talk about that game much. But I think your observations are also key being on the field. Let me just ask you really quick here. This offense this year compared to this offense last year, even though, again, the opponent stinks, can you see a real difference here?
Yeah, they're explosive and they're different. To have Tyler Warren run a play out of the Wildcat, throw a pass out of the Wildcat, make a spectacular one-handed catch on the sideline, catch a touchdown, just a game plan for everything they can throw at you this year. 2 running backs, the tight end. Trey Wallace looks like pretty much a number 1 wide receiver. Amari Evans is a downfield threat. They're creating not only explosive plays in the passing game, but the running game with Nicholas Singleton, who's averaging about 9-10 yards per carry this season for them. Yeah, it's a different offense. And you can see Aller looks more comfortable. They seem to be more confident in the plays. And Aller even said after the game, hey, if something's not working, we trust Coach K, Andy Kotelnicki, to fix it. And as much as Penn State has been successful through 3 games offensively, what might be a greater indication of Kotelnicki's impact is how much Kansas has struggled offensively without him this season. I think it's a better offense. Now, their defense did not play well against Bowling Green, obviously played great against Kent State. Without KJ Winston, they haven't really faced a test yet. And that's a first-round pick caliber safety, maybe best defensive player on their team. What does that look like moving forward? Lane, a freshman, played well against Kent State. They're deep. It's a deep defensive team. But their defense, I can't believe this, right? It's a top 10 defense every year, top 15 defense every year. We're probably looking to learn more about Penn State's defense against Illinois than we are the offense right now. At least in my eyes, I think you can be confident the offense is going to put up 30-plus a game no matter who the opponent is.
I agree. And this is a good test this weekend against Illinois. Like we just talked about it at the beginning of the podcast. Luke Altmaier, veteran guy, makes the right play, doesn't really put the ball in harm's way. Playmaker with his arm and his legs, 2 good receivers for Illinois. It's going to be a good test for that secondary. Like you said, is a little bit banged up. It's going to be a really good test here on Saturday night in Happy Valley.
I think we'll be talking about it on Thursday, right?
I would say so. I would take a wild. If the last 10 minutes were not the perfect sales job by Tripp here on a huge week 5, you better be back for Thursday's pod. It's going to be a really, really fun one here. We got a lot of good matchups, like you said. Some really good ones here that we'll learn a lot about going into week number 5 here in the Big Ten. So make sure you're subscribing wherever you get your pods and also wherever you listen to wherever you do get your pods and on YouTube. Still Enrolled Podcast. We are out there for you. All right. So lastly, before we get out of here, we had a big discussion on Thursday's pod about where USC could be ranked if they do beat Michigan. That was premature because they lost. So we had a big debate.
Imagine that. You were jumping to early conclusions. USC is the team to beat in the Big Ten. No one cared.
They, not the first time and won't be the last time I have gotten ahead of myself and gotten burned by it. So each week on Mondays, here's what we're going to do. Tripp and I will give you our top 5 rankings. We'll have a graphic here in a little bit to have the full 1 through 18 rankings so you can see where your team is in the Big Ten. But today, since we have no graphic and we'll keep it short here, we'll do our top 5 teams in the Big Ten going into week 5. Tripp, the floor is yours, sir. Your top 5 in the Big Ten is who?
USC at 5. I still think they might be better than Michigan, but because they just lost to Michigan, I cannot put them ahead of it. Can't put them ahead of the Wolverines. So I got USC 5, Michigan 4, Oregon 3, Penn State 2, and Ohio State 1. And I feel really good about that. I think there are a couple of teams that, based on results so far, have an argument to be ahead of USC and Michigan, but I still think head-to-head, if you were to line up those 2 teams against Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, Iowa, and Indiana, the teams that round out my top 10, I still think USC and Michigan would be favored and would be my team to beat in that game, albeit a close competitive football game.
Part of what I do with the rankings is not only just how good the team is, how they look, but also your resume. I think resume has to matter here, which is why our top 3 are the same. Shocker. Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, in that order, 1, 2, 3. You have Michigan 4, USC 5. I have Illinois 4 and Indiana 5. In Parker's, you have Illinois right now, 2 at the time they played. And I do value this. I know some people don't. Kansas is kind of the bottom falling out.
Hold on. Let me ask you one question, though. Illinois versus Michigan, neutral site tomorrow. Who are you picking?
Probably, honestly, Michigan. But that to me is such a that is such a cop-out. Because guess what? You know what Illinois, what did not happen to them? They did not get their doors blown off in a game at home. And honestly, we talk about this USC-Michigan game. I think for me, USC lost this game more than Michigan won it. And so, I'm not sitting here now all of a sudden back in on the Wolverines after they won a game in which we were questioning, how the hell did they win this game? How did they do it? We don't know. And so it's a great win for Michigan. For me, they're just outside my top 5. Their number is 6. But when you look at Illinois going on the road in a hostile environment and winning a game in overtime at Nebraska, beating a talented but right now maybe lost offense in Kansas, you're undefeated. You've beaten 2 ranked opponents so far, one of them on the road. Indiana so far, I get their schedule's not been great whatsoever, but they're doing, I think, what good teams do, just bludgeoning everybody they play so far.
Yep, they've been dominant.
So that's why I would rather reward right now Illinois and Indiana, even though, yes, I think Michigan, if you say right now Michigan, Indiana, who wins neutral site, I'd probably say the Wolverines. But I think you have to also include how teams have looked so far this year and their resumes. And I think right now that beat down that Michigan took, I think to me still weighs heavily, despite the fact they got a nice win here over USC on Saturday.
I'm just looking at the rest because we have them here on our sheet, rest of the rankings. I'm surprised how closely both of ours align. Maybe Indiana, I have too low. I have them 10. But overall, we're pretty close on the alignment. I'm just going to read them all for the heck of it. Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan, USC, Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan State, Maryland, Washington, Wisconsin, Minnesota, UCLA, Purdue, and Northwestern.
I have never heard anybody say UCLA. And you know what? I hope I never hear it again. Holy cow. But you're not wrong. Like, you have, let's see, Iowa 9. I have them 10. You have Michigan State 11. I have them 11. We're the same with Maryland at 12 and Washington at 13. I gave Northwestern a little bit of a bump here. I know they're 2-2, but at least they've been competitive. I think for me, UCLA, to steal your word there, is for me last, even though they were much more competitive against LSU than I ever could have imagined.
Shocking. That's a big turnaround for that. That was impressive, actually. It really was.
34-17. Yeah, that's
you know why they're
UCLA.
You know why they're UCLA? Because their games have been UGLY. They're lucky that
you definitely were a kid in middle school that sung that UGLY. You ain't got no alibi. All right. Anyway, yeah, but I think that's what shows you. Like, look, number one, I think the Big Ten so far, maybe not going as expected, but I think you can kind of see like some narratives have either been better than we thought, more disappointing. I like that so far. The voice of reason and myself, for the most part, are seeing the board similarly. Not exactly, similarly. So make sure you check out every single week, every single Monday here. We'll reveal our new Big Ten rankings based on that week's action 1 through 18. We'll have a nice, beautiful graphic there, so you don't have to write everything down and remember. You'll see it right in front of your eyes. All right.
That was a good episode. That was fun. I can't wait to do it again on Thursday.
Me too. Like you highlighted, we got a great week 5 slate here. So make sure you do come back on Thursday. Again, wherever you get your pods, on YouTube as well. Still Enrolled podcast. Have a great week. We'll talk to you Thursday right here on Still Enrolled.